There's someone in your life right now who drains you the moment they walk into the room. You know exactly who I'm talking about. And here's what you haven't admitted to yourself yet: you've started noticing you sound a little more like them every time you walk away. The costly mistake most people make is trying to outmaneuver a toxic person using the toxic person's own tools. You start mirroring their manipulation. You start matching their coldness. You start playing the game just to survive it. And before you know it, you've become a softer, quieter version of the very thing you were trying to escape. Here is the truth nobody wants to say out loud: the only way to deal with toxic people without becoming one is to stop trying to manage who they are and start managing who you are. That's the whole game. Your domain is your own response. Never their character. Say it again in your mind. Your domain is your own response. Never their character. Most people hear that and think it sounds passive. It isn't. It's the most aggressive form of self-protection there is, because it removes the one thing toxic people need from you: your participation in their chaos. Let me walk you through what's actually happening, because understanding the mechanics is the first step toward dismantling them. Think about the person who drains you. What do they actually do? They don't usually attack you head-on. That would be too obvious, too easy to resist. The most dangerous aggression in human life is the kind that hides behind a friendly face. Behind concern. Behind helplessness. Behind the appearance of innocence. You've felt it. Someone says something cutting, and when you flinch, they say they were just joking. Or they play the victim so convincingly that you end up comforting them for the wound they just inflicted on you. Or they flatter you just enough to keep you close, and then use that proximity to slowly undermine your confidence, your relationships, your sense of reality. This is what covert aggression looks like. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't leave visible marks. It operates in the gap between what someone says and what they actually do, in the space between their words and the feeling you're left with after the conversation ends. And here's what nobody tells you about that feeling: it's data. That exhausted, slightly hollowed-out sensation you get after interacting with this person is not you being too sensitive. It's your nervous system reporting a threat that your conscious mind hasn't fully processed yet. Start listening to it. Start treating your own exhaustion as evidence. Because the pattern is always there, once you know how to look. The boundary that gets pushed a little further each time. The subtle guilt trip when you try to pull back. The manufactured crisis that always seems to demand your attention right when you're starting to focus on your own life. The way they position themselves as the center of every narrative, the victim of every story, the person who needs just a little more from you than anyone should reasonably ask. Everyone falls somewhere on a spectrum of self-absorption. That's not a flaw. That's human. But the people who truly damage you are the ones who have turned that self-absorption into a complete system. They cannot see you. They can only see what you do for them or to them. Your feelings are not real to them in the way their feelings are real to them. Your needs are not visible. Your boundaries are not legitimate. They are obstacles. And the moment you understand this, really understand it, something shifts. You stop trying to explain yourself to someone who is constitutionally incapable of receiving the explanation. You stop waiting for the apology that would make it all okay, because you realize the apology would just be another move in the same game. Epictetus understood this almost 2,000 years ago. He was born a slave. He was beaten so severely his leg was permanently damaged. He was exiled. And through all of it, he arrived at one of the most quietly radical ideas in the history of human thought, that nothing outside your own mind can truly harm you unless you let it. That's not a platitude. That's a survival technology. Epictetus drew a line between what is in your control and what is not, and he said, live entirely on your side of that line. Another person's character is not in your control. Their jealousy is not in your control. Their need to control you, to diminish you, to make themselves feel bigger by making you feel smaller, none of that is in your control. What is in your control is whether you stay in the room. Whether you absorb the narrative they're selling. Whether you internalize the guilt they're manufacturing. Whether you walk away with your integrity intact or whether you walk away carrying a piece of their poison inside you. Here's what nobody tells you about why you keep getting pulled back in. It's not because you're weak. It's because you're nice. And I don't mean nice the way people usually mean it. I mean nice as a strategy. Nice as a covert contract. Most people who get trapped in toxic dynamics are not passive victims. They are active participants in a pattern they don't understand. Here's how it works. Somewhere along the way, probably a long time ago, you learned that being good, being accommodating, being the person who never causes trouble, was the safest way to get love and avoid conflict. You learned that if you were good enough, people would take care of you. If you were selfless enough, people would notice. If you sacrificed enough, someone would eventually give back. You turned this into an unconscious agreement with the world. The problem is that the other party never signed it. You've been holding up your end of a contract that exists only in your mind, and every time someone fails to honor it, you feel betrayed. But they never agreed to it. They don't even know it exists. This is the trap. The nice person and the toxic person are not opposites. They are mirrors. They are two halves of the same dysfunctional dance. The toxic person takes, and the nice person gives. The toxic person creates chaos, and the nice person rushes in to manage it. The toxic person plays the victim, and the nice person plays the rescuer. And both of them are operating from the same place, a need to control the other person's behavior to feel safe. Think about that for a moment. Your people-pleasing is not generosity. It's a manipulative strategy to get other people to meet your needs without you having to ask directly. Your niceness is not kindness. It's a covert contract that says, I'll be good to you, and in return, you'll be good to me. And when that contract gets broken, which it always does, the resentment doesn't just sit there. It goes underground. It leaks out as passive aggression. As emotional withdrawal. As the quiet, grinding contempt you start to feel toward people you're supposed to love. And here's the most insidious part, the toxic person in your life can feel that resentment. They sense it. And they use it. They point to it and say, see, you're not so good either. They use your suppressed anger as proof that you're just as flawed as they are, which gives them permission to keep behaving the way they do. It's a closed loop. And you stay in it because you think the answer is to be nicer. To give more. To tolerate more. To explain yourself one more time, with more clarity, with more patience, as if the problem is that you haven't communicated well enough yet. But the problem was never communication. The problem is that you're trying to manage someone else's character with your own behavior, and that is a game you will always lose. So what do? You stop playing. Not with anger. Not with drama. Not with a confrontation where you finally tell them everything they've done wrong, because that's just another form of engagement. You stop playing by changing what you invest in. Here's what that looks like in practice. First, you withdraw your emotional investment strategically. This doesn't mean you cut them off dramatically. It means you Stop feeding the dynamic. You stop being available for the manufactured crises. You stop being the audience for the victim narratives. You stop providing the emotional labor that keeps the system running. When they come to you with their chaos, you listen without absorbing. You acknowledge without fixing. You respond without reacting. And you do this not because you're cold, but because you've finally understood that your emotional resources are finite and that spending them on someone who will never reciprocate is not generosity. It's self-abandonment. Second, you refuse to argue. This is harder than it sounds, because toxic people are expert arguers. They know how to draw you into a fight where the rules are rigged, where no matter what you say, they'll twist it, reframe it, use it against you. They don't argue to reach understanding. They argue to win. And the only way to win a rigged game is to not play. When they push, you hold your position calmly. You don't justify. You don't explain. You don't defend. You simply state your boundary and let the silence do the work. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that has stayed with me, something he reminded himself of in his private journal, probably late at night, probably exhausted, probably dealing with people who tested every ounce of his patience. He said, "The best way to get back at people who wrong you is to not be like them." Read that again in your mind. The best revenge is to not become what you hate. That's not just philosophy. That's a tactical instruction. Because the moment you become like them, you've lost twice. You've lost the relationship, and you've lost yourself. Third, you develop what I call quiet firmness. This is the quality that disarms manipulation more effectively than any confrontation ever could. Quiet firmness is when you know exactly what you will and will not accept, and you communicate it not through speeches or ultimatums but through your behavior. You don't announce your boundaries. You live them. When someone crosses a line, you don't argue about it. You simply adjust your proximity. You pull back. You become less available. You let the natural consequences of their behavior unfold without stepping in to buffer them. And you do this without malice, without the satisfaction of watching them struggle, without the secret hope that your withdrawal will finally make them change. Because here's the thing you have to accept, and it's the hardest thing: they might not change. They probably won't. The deep narcissist, the truly toxic person, the one who has built their entire identity around never being wrong, never being at fault, never being the one who needs to grow, that person is not going to have a revelation because you set a boundary. They're going to get worse before they get better, if they get better at all. They're going to accuse you of being cold. They're going to tell you you've changed. They're going to recruit other people to their version of the story. And you're going to have to sit with that. You're going to have to tolerate being misunderstood. You're going to have to tolerate the discomfort of someone being angry at you for refusing to let them drain you anymore. This is where most people fold. This is where the nice person reaches their limit and goes back to giving, because the guilt of withdrawal feels worse than the pain of staying. But that guilt is not a signal to return. That guilt is the last echo of a pattern that was never serving you. Sit with it. Let it burn. It won't kill you. It will pass. And on the other side of it is something you've never fully felt before: your own weight. Your own solidity. The experience of being a person who is not defined by someone else's needs. Now, here's the deeper work, because boundaries alone aren't enough. If you only build walls, you'll end up isolated and bitter, which is just another form of toxicity. The real practice is turning your attention inward and competing with the only person worth competing with, who you were yesterday. Most people spend their energy comparing themselves to others. Am I more successful? Am I more attractive? Am I more put together? The toxic person in your life is doing this constantly. They measure themselves against everyone around them, and because they can never feel enough, they need to diminish everyone else to feel adequate. You don't have to play that game. You can step off the comparison treadmill entirely. The Stoics had a practice for this. Every morning, before the day began, they would review their own character. Not against the world. Against themselves. Am I more patient than I was a month ago? Am I more honest? Am I more in control of my reactions? Am I less reactive? Am I more grounded? This is the only competition that produces growth without anxiety, because the opponent is someone you can actually influence, yourself. When you make this your focus, something remarkable happens to your relationship with the toxic person. They become less interesting. Not because they've changed. Because you have. When your center of gravity shifts from their behavior to your own development, their drama starts to look like what it actually is: small, repetitive, predictable, boring, even. You stop being fascinated by the chaos. You stop analyzing their motivations. You stop replaying conversations in your head, trying to figure out what you could have said differently. You stop being a student of their pathology and start being a student of your own growth. And that shift, subtle as it is, changes the entire dynamic. Because toxic people feed on engagement. They need your attention, your emotional reactions, your defenses, your explanations. When you withdraw all of that, not with hostility but with genuine indifference, they lose their power. Not because you took it from them. Because you stopped giving them yours. Let me give you something concrete. The next time you interact with this person, try this. Before you respond to anything they say, pause. One breath. In that breath, ask yourself one question: is what I'm about to say coming from my values or from their provocation? If it's from their provocation, don't say it. If it's from your values, say it plainly, without heat, without justification. This single habit, practiced consistently, will change every toxic relationship in your life. Not because it changes them. Because it changes you. And here's what nobody tells you about authentic kindness. Real kindness doesn't come from suppressing your needs to please others. It comes from abundance. From having so much regard for yourself that you can afford to extend regard to someone else without it costing you your center. The nice person isn't kind. The nice person is desperate. Desperate to be liked, desperate to avoid conflict, desperate to feel like they're good enough. And desperation masquerading as kindness is just manipulation with a smile. The integrated person, the person who has done the work to know themselves, accept themselves, and stand in their own ground, that person can be genuinely generous. Because they're giving from a full cup, not from an empty one. They're giving because they choose to, not because they need something in return. And that kind of kindness is unmistakable. It has a different texture. It doesn't keep score. It doesn't build resentment. It doesn't collapse the moment it isn't reciprocated. If you want to deal with toxic people without becoming one, you have to become this person. Not overnight. Not through some dramatic transformation. Through daily, incremental, almost invisible choices to be more honest, more direct, more willing to tolerate the discomfort of being misunderstood. You start by telling the truth when it would be easier to lie. You start by saying no when you mean no, without a 12-paragraph explanation. You start by letting people be disappointed in you without rushing to fix it. You start by noticing the moment you're about to suppress a real feeling to keep the peace, and choosing to express it instead. Calmly. Simply. Without apology. Carl Jung called the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge the shadow. The nice person has a massive shadow. It contains all the anger, the boundaries, the directness, the self-respect that they've been suppressing for years, convinced that these things make them unlovable. But here's the paradox: those are exactly the qualities that make you trustworthy. People don't trust perfection. They trust honesty. They trust someone who is clearly real, clearly flawed, clearly human, and clearly okay with all of it. When you stop hiding your imperfections, something breaks open. You become magnetic in a way that niceness never achieved. Because people can feel authenticity. They can sense when someone is performing and when someone is actually present. And the toxic person in your life, the one who has been feeding on your performance, will feel it too. They'll feel you slipping away. Not physically. Energetically. The supply will be drying up. And they will react. This is the critical moment. This is where you hold. They will escalate. They will try new tactics. They will alternate between charm and aggression, between warmth and coldness, between victimhood and accusation. This is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. This is a sign that you're doing something right. The system is trying to restore itself, and you are the variable that changed. Seneca, who lived surrounded by political snakes in the court of Nero, who watched people he loved get destroyed by paranoia and power, who was eventually forced to take his own life by the very emperor he had tried to guide, Seneca had a practice. He would begin each day by telling himself, "Today I will meet with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness." Not because he was pessimistic. Because he was prepared. He knew what humans were capable of, and he refused to be surprised by it. And in that refusal to be surprised, he found something extraordinary: freedom. Because when you expect people to be difficult and they are, you don't lose your composure. You don't take it personally. You don't spiral into, "Why is this happening to me?" You simply handle it. The Stoics didn't teach detachment from people. They taught attachment to your own principles. They didn't say, "Don't care about anyone." They said, "Care about your integrity more than you care about anyone's opinion of you." And that distinction is everything. Because the toxic person's primary weapon is your need for their approval. Not their overt approval, necessarily. Sometimes it's the need to not be the bad guy in their story. The need to not be the one who walked away. The need to be able to say you tried everything. Let go of that. You don't need to be the hero of their narrative. You don't need to be the villain either. You just need to be the person who knows where their responsibilities end and someone else's begin. You are responsible for your own needs. Not anyone else's. You are responsible for getting them met. You are responsible for your own emotional state. Not anyone else's. You are responsible for your own integrity. Not anyone else's character. When you truly internalize this, the toxic person in your life doesn't disappear. But they shrink. They occupy a smaller and smaller corner of your mental real estate. They stop being the person you think about when you're trying to fall asleep. They stop being the person whose opinion you replay and dissect. They become someone you used to be entangled with, and the entanglement slowly dissolves not through confrontation but through neglect. You simply stop watering that plant. And here's the most important thing I can tell you about this process: you will slip. You will have moments where you fall back into the old pattern. You'll be tired, or stressed, or lonely, and you'll reach for the familiar comfort of being needed, even by someone who uses you. When that happens, don't spiral into self-judgment. That's just another form of the same disease. The nice person's harshest critic is always themselves. They believe they must be perfect to be acceptable, and every failure is proof that they're fundamentally flawed. That belief is the root of the entire pattern. So when you slip, catch yourself. Notice it. Name it. And return to your principles. Not to your performance. To your principles. The difference between someone who deals with toxic people and someone who becomes one is not perfection. It's the direction of their attention. The toxic person's attention is always outward, always scanning for threats, for slights, for opportunities to feel superior. Your attention, if you're doing this work, is inward, always asking, am I in alignment with my own values right now? Am I reacting or responding? Am I being the person I want to be, regardless of who I'm dealing with? That question, asked consistently, becomes a kind of armor. Not the kind that blocks pain. The kind that prevents you from becoming the source of it. Let me bring you back to where we started. There's someone in your life right now who drains you. And you've noticed you're starting to sound like them. That observation is not a failure. It's a wake-up call. It's your mind telling you that the proximity is changing you, and you need to decide whether the change is one you're choosing or one that's happening to you. Because here's the truth, you will become like the people you spend the most time with. Not through intention. Through osmosis. Through the slow, daily absorption of their patterns, their language, their way of seeing the world. If you spend enough time around someone who sees everyone as a threat, you'll start seeing threats everywhere. If you spend enough time around someone who manipulates, you'll start manipulating, even if you tell yourself you're just protecting yourself. The only defense is conscious, deliberate, daily practice of being who you actually want to be. Not in reaction to them. In spite of them. And eventually, because of them. Because the toxic person, for all the damage they do, gives you something invaluable if you know how to use it. They give you a clear picture of what you don't want to become. They show you, in vivid detail, the cost of self-absorption, the ugliness of manipulation, the loneliness of a life lived without genuine empathy. And if you're paying attention, that picture becomes a map. A map of what to avoid, what to dismantle in yourself, what to replace with something stronger. Epictetus said that every difficulty in life is an opportunity to practice virtue. He didn't mean that suffering is good. He meant that difficulty is the only testing ground where your character can actually grow. Without the difficult person, you would never know if your boundaries were real. You would never know if your patience was genuine or just circumstantial. You would never discover the quiet firmness that you're capable of. The toxic person is your training partner. Not your teacher. Not your friend. Your training partner. They will push you, test you, and try to break you. And every time you hold your ground without becoming them, you win. Not the argument. Not the relationship. You win yourself. One more day. One more interaction. One more moment where you chose your integrity over their approval. And over time, those moments accumulate. They become a pattern. The pattern becomes a character. And the character becomes the kind of person who doesn't just survive toxic people but is, in the deepest sense, immune to them. Not because they built higher walls. Because they built a stronger self. Remember what I said at the beginning. The only way to deal with toxic people without becoming one is to stop trying to manage who they are and start managing who you are. Your domain is your own response. Never their character. That's not a limitation. That's your freedom. That's your power. That's the one thing nobody can take from you unless you hand it over. So stop handing it over. Start reclaiming it. Not with anger. Not with speeches. With the quiet, daily, unglamorous work of becoming someone who is so rooted in their own values that the storms of other people's dysfunction blow past without uprooting them. The toxic person will still be toxic. The world will still be full of people who try to drain you, manipulate you, and make you doubt your own experience. But you will be different. You will be steady. You will be clear. You will be the kind of person who looks at chaos and does not flinch, because you know exactly who you are and exactly what is yours to carry and exactly what is not. And that clarity, that quiet, unshakable clarity, is the one thing that changes everything. Stay disciplined. Choose growth over ease. And remember, the person you're becoming is worth far more than the approval of the person you're leaving behind.